Hey, Al, it's Tom. Sorry I'm not outside. I have to wait for some workers to show up here, and it's raining and it's nasty. So, continuing with the third member of our group here on our story series, I'd like to tell you about a gentleman named Thom Rivell. Thom was a sports writer for Field and Stream back in the 50s. And earlier, back in just before World War II, he also wrote for Field and Stream. Now, Thom was a professional fly fisherman. And I met Thom. He ran a program called the Future Fisherman's Program here in our area. I started taking my kids there, and I met Thom and eventually wound up being a director there. It was a great program. We taught kids how to tie flies, build their own fly rods. And the way the program worked is the more they showed up, the more rewards they got to where they could build a handmade fly rod of their own, usually using Loomis or Sage blanks. If you're not a fly fisherman, that's they're really expensive blanks, and the kids would make their own fly rods. And then once you did that, you were required to fill a fly box, and to pass the program and move on, you literally had to use your handmade rod, your handmade flies to go catch a fish. Now, where the program was I believe that's the west branch of the Paulpack Creek that ran down through there, and there was some monster fish in that creek. I got a record here. It was, well, at the time, third on the state record books. It was rainbow was 5.9 pounds and 39 inches long, or 29 inches long, 29. So anyway, that's how the program worked. So you went there once a week. It was generally on a Sunday for 2 hours. There was some phenomenal people there and kids. And boy, Thom was a character. Thom was like 92 years old. He didn't care how he said it, what he said, or anything else. Now, he was cordial around the kids. But as far as being, with the adults, he smoked cigarettes and he had a long white beard. I mean, like Santa Claus type beard that was stained brown from the nicotine. He was a character. So, a little background besides that, he was a field writer for Field and Stream. I guess he grew up in a family of woodsmen, outdoorsmen. And he had a couple of the original knives that he carried. A couple of them were, your general 4 to 5 inch hunting knives, and a few of them were bigger bowies that were carried on a regular basis. Now, his hunting equipment, I mean, he showed me his deer rifle was his great grandfather's. It was a original trapdoor Sharps that his great grandfather carried in the cavalry. To go hunting deer with it, he had to find somebody who would load him black powdered shells because it wouldn't fire smokeless rounds. Oh man, that thing was like, for its age, it was like brand new. It was a phenomenal weapon. Now, Thom would tell us stories, and he had quite a collection of antique fly fishing and fishing gear. I mean, anything from the early 1900s up. He even had some stuff from the 1700s. He had a fly wallet that he showed me of hand tied flies that was uh, tied by a nun in the 18 no yeah early 1800s, and she used to go out into the stream and fish for the nunnery or the convent, whatever you want to call it. He had some stories and some Yeah, I'm Quasimodo. Anyway, he had some stories that was beyond belief. A few of them he told me was him and his father and his uncle. They decided to take a canoe trip in the Canadian wilderness for, I think he said it was 21 days, just fly fishing and hunting. And getting to know Thom and talking to him, I mean, you understood. He grew up in the days when you wore the high jack boots and the wool knickers, stuff like that. You got to understood what an old woodsman was like. And woodsmen of that era were not skitsy people. They had more intestinal fortitude than most people nowadays. So they go off in the Canadian wilderness, and they were in a canoe, and yeah, just some of the gear lists he was telling me would be. I would have loved to seen pictures like his uncle had a 30-30 Winchester. And Thom carried his 45-70. Plus he had a Colt. I think he said it was an 1882 or 76 uh, pistol that he carried also, 45 caliber. And his dad had I believe Thom said it was a 30-40. No, I'm sorry, it was a 30-06 Winchester. I forget the model number. I think it was a 54, but it was the kind of Teddy Roosevelt carried. There's going to be multiple parts of this one too, because it's just too much to carry. How they went out for 21 days and they built a base camp. They built small camps. They fished. They hunted. They took a moose, and Thom said about 200 pounds of fish. At that time, there was no freezing capacities or keeping things cool. So when they took the moose, they bagged the moose and they put the moose in the water to keep it cool because the water up there stays around 40 to 35 to 40 degrees. And luckily they shot it towards the end of the trip. But the fish and everything, that went from the stream either in your stomach or to the smoker that they built out of a piece of canvas and a tripod. And being 92 at the time, his memory was kind of broken up, so he didn't get like complete stories. You just got pieces. And with some memories like that just stuck out. Now, Thom had a small fly shop in a little town called Newfoundland, PA. And when you went in there, it was jam packed. I mean, he tried to fit 3 fly shops into one shop. And you'd go over there when he was in, and you could sit for hours and drink coffee and just BS about the old days. He taught me a lot about casting. He taught me a lot about fly usage. And at the time, I used to hand tie my own flies. So we sat there one day. He says, "Me, tie me up a couple of these, couple of them, couple of this, couple of that." And I did. He looked at me. He said, "You're a natural at doing this." And then he started buying flies off me. So I was actually tying flies for his shop for quite a few years. Actually, oddly enough, that tube that's right there has got 2 of Thom's hand tied rods in there. And side note, Garth, if you're watching this, in that tube is one of your rods. I am going to give you one of them rods. A good friend of mine who watches me on here, Garth Estad, was one of the directors up there also. And before I'll get to the end of the story, how this all ends, um, he was supposed to have gotten a rod from Thom, and things happened. He never received one. So, but he wrote books. He wrote articles. He we have a little. I have a book here somewhere of his. The book covers stuff from like when Tom was a kid and he went fly fishing. The line was gut line, made out of cat gut, and you had to wax it before you went, and when you got home, you had to hang it and let it dry. Otherwise, it would rot. You tied your own hand leaders, your own tippets, everything. So it was interesting hearing about all this. The guy traveling the Canadian wilderness with a 45-70 and a catgut fishing line, and it was casting reels on a casting pole with the old catgut line. And oh yeah, the lures. He told you about the lures he used, and it was back in them days. It was mostly spoons with big bucktails on. So, um, World War II rolled around. Tom was a staff sergeant at the time, and in the Air Force, Army Air Corps. And through the course of his career in World War II, he was actually one of the guards that guarded the atom bomb on Tinian, I believe it was. And he was telling us about some of that too. The Japs knew that they knew the bomb was where it was at, and they used to air raid the base every day, and everybody was just kind of praying that this thing didn't go off. And he never said much about his World War II stories, which is common among veterans that seen some action. But being in Tom's shop, I mean, you'd run into various people. I mean, just strangers, be older men, and who was that? Oh, that was the guy that used to write for whoever, and that was this. And it was like they'd stop in. So being that he was from Newfoundland, he had a couple of different places in Newfoundland that was really interesting. And when we get back on part two, we'll cover them. So we'll see you guys in a moment.